This first topic is mainly going to be about adventure crafting theory and won't apply specifically to Fantasy Grounds itself, but it will help newer DMs make use of the resources available to them. The first and best resource is going to be your own imagination. And for those of you who feel that your imagination might not be up to the task, ask yourself one question. What would you find as an entertaining, enjoyable adventure that you might want to go on, specifically in the world of your choosing, and then take note of all of the ideas that just popped into your head. The issue now is that while you now have some ideas available to you, you may not have the experience on how to translate those ideas into an adventure. To help guide you with that particular process, you really should make use of the Dungeon Master's Guide itself, be it a physical hard copy, PDF, or simply a reference module within Fantasy Grounds itself. So if you're new to the process of creating an adventure, I recommend you start with reviewing Chapter 3. And for those of you who have a physical or PDF copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide, that is on page 71. So for those of you who have the module available within Fantasy Grounds, or only have it available within Fantasy Grounds, I've gone ahead and loaded up a very empty basic campaign here. And I will go through the process of showing how I did that here later on once we get through this theory crafting video, if you will. But if this is your only available resource, you're going to need to be in Fantasy Grounds in order to actually go through the process of reviewing the material that is available to you. To get access to it, you click on the library button, which is at the bottom of the right of the screen. Click on modules, which is to the bottom left of the library screen. And down in the bottom, just put in the keyword dungeon. So you'll see that I searched for dungeon there. And the top left, you should see all of the Dungeon Master's Guide reference material. There is the actual guide itself. There is some map material that comes with it, as well as a reference guide for the players. You don't need to have either of these two things open. And this is just a supplement for Dungeon of the Mad Mage there. Actually, I think that might be the module itself, but we're not going to look at that today. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this load button here. And it will take a couple of seconds to go through the process of loading up the module. And it will take a little longer for anyone who's got a slightly slower system, but that is perfectly fine. It just takes a bit of effort for your system to open everything up associated with it. When you see the state of the book change to an open book, that means your module is now available for you. And what that means is that all of the reference material associated with the Dungeon Master's Guide available to the DM is now available within Fantasy Grounds. And you can close that data module activation window, and what will happen is you will return to your library window. Within that, you'll now see a core rules category, and the Dungeon Master's Guide reference guide is now loaded here. Clicking on this title, or on the book, but generally I click on the title just for the sake of it, will activate all of the various topics that are in here. It can be a little bit difficult to follow these headings, so what I typically do is click on the reference manual here, and this will literally take you to the entire Dungeon Master's Guide as if you had a physical copy available to you. And that could be a little bit difficult to read. Unfortunately, I apologize. You probably should follow along with your own instance of Fantasy Grounds to making things a little bit easier for you to read there. And what you're looking for is Chapter 3, called Creating Adventures. If you click that, it will expand out all of the subcategories specific to Chapter 3, and you can just literally scroll down within the right pane to see the exact same material that you would normally see in a physical copy of the actual book, although I will note that this image here is actually different than the one that I'm staring at right now inside of my my physical copy. No, okay, it is. This is the image here that I'm actually seeing. I was just looking at the previous page, or the next page in. So you literally will want to go through and read the material that is here, get a general understanding of it, because it literally will go over all of the concepts and ideas that you should consider and think of when it comes to actually creating an adventure. In case you didn't catch that, when I switched pages from creating adventures to elements of a great adventure, I literally just clicked on this right button here down at the bottom of the page. and that will literally scroll through, or I shouldn't say scroll through, but it will actually switch the page for you as to what is available within the reference guide here. And you can go back and forth as needed. So if you're reading ahead, you had a question that just popped up, the previous page might answer it, you can literally just back up a page. So navigating through the pages is almost as easy as flipping the pages on a physical copy. So now that you actually know how to get at the resource that is outside of your mind, the second best resource available to you, the process of going through and creating your adventure or creating your campaign can now begin. For those of you who are literally just starting out in going through this particular process, I highly recommend you stick with a very small adventure. And the reason for that is you're going to cover a lot of the basic elements that allow you to create a good, solid foundation for that adventure and give you the experience you need to be able to take that adventure and adjust it, or maybe your players didn't go the direction you chose, give you that experience to all of a sudden take the tangent the players have now taken because of that. So with that in mind, what you're going to want to do is go back to the list of ideas that you came up with before and see if there's anything there that you might want to take a few minutes and expand out on. So I'm going to use an example within the Fantasy Grounds interface here of some ideas that I've come up with. And I'm going to go through and utilize the notes feature that is available within Fantasy Grounds to actually make note of those particular ideas. Okay, so I'm just going to close out this window here and there. Now, the notes feature is probably one of the least used but most powerful features within Fantasy Grounds. And I hope that SmiteWorks adds additional functionality to it that will allow it to become the best note-taking capability of any genre that exists today. And essentially what I mean by that is it can be a little bit clunky to get at creating a note if you're not familiar with how Fantasy Grounds itself works. And with that in mind, all I did is I clicked on the Notes button. If you don't see the Notes button, all you have to do is go to your library. So just let me close that. Go to your library, and you can either select the GM option, which will give you a list of all of these particular options available to you, and I highly recommend that you do that. If, however, you are still stuck, you can enable it individually. So you can see here that I'm turning the Notes button on and off, but I don't like it down there. I like it up here next to the character page. Finally, the last location where from a GM's perspective it will show up is going to be if you click the All button, which is over on the top right of the library button. And you can see here that it now has moved my taskbar, if you will, or button bar into a side-by-side situation. I don't like that unless I'm generally looking for something specific to a particular class or anything like that. I generally keep it in the GM side. So once again, just click on the Notes button, and you'll see that it's initially empty. In our case, we want to use it as a reference guide outside of the Dungeon Master's Guide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just right-click with my mouse button, and the bottom button here is Create Item. Another way to do it is to click this Edit List button that's at the bottom right of the Notes pane. Once you do that, a little plus will appear here. And it's the exact same thing. That is literally all it is. I generally do the right-click and then select. And what you'll get is a blank note and a new entry that is showing up here. Okay, so with that in mind, let's have a look here. I want this to be brainstorming ideas. The owner is me, it is not public, and then below this yellow line, which might be a bit tricky to see, is where your text is actually going to start. And this is where you can start making taking all of the notes that you've come up with, throw them in here, and then taking those exact same notes and expand upon them. So the ideas that I came up with is we're going to start in a small village. It's going to be a haunted, move that out of the way, graveyard. Surprise, surprise. A new grave was being dug, and the caretaker uncovered a an unexpected, let's say, I'm trying to think of the word that I'm looking for, mainly in reference to a burrow. That's what I'm looking for, burrow in Skyrim. All right. So those were the initial ideas that I had gone through and come up with. And you'll note that you don't have to save it. The minute you add something to that particular note field, it's saved. So as long as you back up your campaign folder, which again, I'll show you how to do that later, this information is going to be saved. Now, I'm not doing this inside of a full-blown campaign folder that I'm going to use as my master reference. I will go through and show you how to create that in the next video. This is literally just how do we go through and come up with the ideas for creating an adventure. That's what this video is all about. Now, with this in mind, I've got that information available to me, but it's very basic. All right, so we're starting in a small village. Okay, big cliche, but normal. And sometimes the best adventures can be a cliche overall. Haunted graveyard. Okay, so let's think on that. Haunted graveyard. What are you going to have in a graveyard? You're going to have tombstones. You're going to have fences, maybe, wrapping around the entire graveyard, or around a specific tomb in the event that it might be a bit of an upper scale class citizen or anything like that. Upper class citizen, not upper scale. Let's see. We're gonna have let's see, skeletons that are not undead. Undead skeletons that the party is going to have to deal with. Zombies, most likely. I'm wondering if a lich might be a bit too powerful for a level 1 party to deal with. Maybe make it a right as the end boss, things like that. So now I'm starting to add in ideas. And you don't have to use them all. You're literally just going through the process of creating concepts. Okay. Let's see here. Hauntings. Oops. Only occur at night. One person in the village vanishes each night, so maybe that's a vampire. Although some people like to spell it vampire with a Y. Hauntings only occur at night. One person in the villages vanished at night, once per week, let's say. Has been happening for a month. Alright, now I'm going to go see if I can increase the font size so that you guys can read the content that I'm writing here. That's partially why I'm being vocal about what I'm typing out, is just so that you don't have to worry about it. Paragraph types, heading, chat frame, list, links, tables, body, text. No, okay. So you can't really adjust the font. What I can do, though, scale UI 200. Whoa, that's a little bit too big. Scale UI 100. All right, there. That might be a little bit easier for you to read. Let's make it 125. Okay, that I can deal with. All right. There used to be a way to... Let me shrink that. Oops. 100. Reduce this size, move you over, put you back. I don't like the fact that it overwrites that command. Anyway, okay, so I've now made this just a little bit larger, so hopefully it's a little bit more visible. Okay. Let's see. What else can we come up with? All right. We'll require a party of 2 to 4 players, starting at level 1. Innkeeper will provide initial hook, i.e. the party might over here, the innkeeper talking with another member of the village or village about issue. And that could be your quest hook, if you will. Now we're going through the process of filling in some general ideas. And you're going to want to do this multiple times. And you're literally going to want to start at the top, read what you've got there, go through and clarify a few things. So, i.e. normal graves, undead skeletons, zombies would be more freshly, maybe not. You start looking at zombies, there's a chance that you're probably dealing with a white or a lich. I'm not sure if a vampire would go through and raise any of those. That's possible, I suppose. In the case of Ravenloft, that does happen. But a vampire could also potentially have other vampires. It's kind of like how they grow in power, is increase their loyalty base and at the same time live long. As they age, they get stronger and stronger. All right. Hauntings only occur at night. One person in the village vanishes at night. Not vanished, vanishes at night once per week. So maybe it's a werewolf? Werewolf. Oops, werewolf. Has been happening. Let's expand this for 3 months. So that potentially means that on the average of 4 weeks per month, that's 12 people have gone missing. Now, the other thing, not all could be dead or converted to a vampire. Okay, so as you go through this particular process, the whole framework of what you're going to be doing will expand. So while I was reviewing the previous section of this video, I came up with another idea, and maybe it's not villagers that are going missing, but livestock instead. So what we've got are some ideas. How do we apply them to an actual adventure? Well, that's where you want to go back to, the reference guide here. All right. Little trick here. If you grab a window by the leftmost pane, you can move it up above the frame and then still be able to move it back down later on. There is a way to potentially use the control key to resize. So I'm holding down the control key and resizing the window here. All right, I have to give credit to Pete Bog for pointing that out to me. Thank you, by the way. All right, so what you're going to want to do is open up the Dungeon Master's reference guide again. And specifically, you're going to return to Chapter 3. There we go. All right, yeah, that's a little bit easier using the control key. Okay. And specifically what you're looking for is the elements of a great adventure. And you're going to want to take some of the ideas that these trigger and make a note of them as well inside of your brainstorming ideas. But specifically what I'm looking for is this. There's an actual defined structure to every adventure. There is a starting point. There's a middle, which is where all of your quests are going to occur in, or all of the information gathering, essentially the slowest point of the adventure, or it could be quick paced depending on the quality of the adventure. And then you have an ending. Essentially, the ending is where you've dealt with a particular problem or the major quest, and you're returning to the initial quest giver to reap your reward, if you will. And those are really what come into play. So you're at some point when you're finished dealing with coming up with ideas. And by the way, you're never actually truly going to be done with it. I just want to make that clear. Just because you haven't thought of everything here that you want to be able to include the adventure doesn't mean you can't incorporate it later. But you're going to want to start organizing it. And so, for example, let's take items here that are specific to the beginning of the adventure. Beginning. I can't spell today. There we go. All right, so starting in a village is part of the beginning. This references the beginning of how it occurred. So that could be information that you'd want to feed the dungeon master if you're going to share this out, or remind yourself if you're going to run the adventure multiple times, or even the first time, because you may not remember everything about your adventure when you've gone through the process of completing the design of your adventure. So by the time you actually run that adventure, you might have forgotten some of the earlier parts. So it's always good to leave reference notes for yourself. Let's see, we're going to be starting at level 1. Okay, it's going to be that many 2 to 4 players. This is part of the initial story and part of the beginning as well, or the middle as well. So this reference here, this could lead to a particular timeline issue. So for example, let's say there are 100 people in the village, 12 are now missing, so they have 88 left. Well, there's a defined timeline as to how long this adventure can go on. Eventually, the village is going to be empty. But that might also lead into a more of a regional adventure. So maybe the party doesn't necessarily defeat the creature or NPC that is doing this in the initial adventure. Maybe they just simply chase it off. And now the second part of the adventure expands them out from the little tiny village to now more of a regional conflict, in the sense that they now have to chase that particular creature down. And that might lead to other adventures throughout the whole process. So that's something to consider. I'm actually going to make note of that. To deal with the creature initially, and it could trigger. Okay, so essentially that means that they might complete the initial requirements of the quest given by the local mayor or the innkeeper or whoever you're going to decide to give that out, in the sense that that creature is no longer dealing or affecting the local village, or the village is dead. One of those two scenarios. Adventure. So that could mean there's now an undead army that has now been raised by that particular creature. This is applicable to the beginning, as is the innkeeper, because the party, maybe the party is going through the village, they happen to be stopping for the night, and that's when they hear this. Let's see, the middle, they're going to find out it's haunted graveyard, so all of this could be part of the middle. Ugh, I don't know why it's expanding the spacing there. Definitely don't need that. Okay. They find out that the haunting has occurred at night. This would be part of the beginning. This could be beginning and end. So ending. And essentially what you want to do is any idea that straddles like the middle and the ending could potentially be lead to an ongoing long-term thing. ending. They might not be able to deal with the creature initially. There's now an undead army. Leads into another quest. All right. So, now it's a little bit difficult to differentiate the headers. So I'm going to simply highlight, right-click. Actually, I don't even need to highlight. You just right-click, select, go to heading. So again, that's right-click, select paragraph types, go to heading, and it will change the, oops, I keep forgetting to do that. I'm used to text editors or word editors, stuff like that. I don't know why I highlight every single time I did that. Okay. So I've now got a little bit more in the way of organization to the overall structure. And I'm going to capitalize this because my OCD is triggered so badly right now. There we go. And just as an FYI, we'll update the title of that as well. So anytime you make an adjustment here, will affect the information that is here. Okay. And essentially, you'll just want to go through, and now that you have some ideas written down, reread Chapter 3. And through that, make note of any additional ideas that pop up. I mean, just simply reading a paragraph might trigger an idea as to what you want to do or anything like this. Now, these tables here, I will get to them a little bit later. They are underneath the tables section. So there is a whole slew of tables that you can make use of that. But I will get to that in a later video that's dedicated strictly to tables and showing you how to use them. So you don't need to necessarily do anything, but there's nothing that precludes you from rolling a d12, for example, and selecting an item from this. And you can either do it through here, like that, or if you've got a physical die in front of you, you just roll it. And that rolled a 2. So that means that while traveling in the wilderness, the characters notice the entrance to the adventure location. That actually may be perfect, because while they might know where the graveyard is, they might not actually be associated with the burrow that was uncovered. Maybe the burrow simply held the creature, and then when the burrow was uncovered, it escaped and moved to another location. So there's another idea. See how that works? Burrow might be empty. Oops. Stumble. All right, so I've added that one little roll that just triggered a whole new direction that the campaign could take. So literally, you can go through and do that. Now, at the same time, you could potentially find that table, but as I said, I'll cover that in another area. We don't really want to focus on any of the encounters just yet. Essentially, you want to define elements that are specific to the beginning, fill in things that they could potentially run into in the middle in a very basic sense. Now, I happen to have specific types of creatures here, and that is sort of a slip in my part, because anyone who's new to Dungeons & Dragons might not know that these creatures exist. And I will get to that at the end of this video as to where do you find that information. Finally, the ending. Does the ending mean that the creature is defeated? Does the ending mean that the local quest is complete, but it is now expanded into a more regional quest because the creature has moved on to a different area? That kind of thing. I mean, if you're going to have a random roll, which is what I've got on a note here, that the party could potentially, let's say a D100, they find it on a 95 percentile or higher, there's a good chance you might never roll 95 before the entire population of the village is depleted. So, little bits of things that you can go through here. Now, here's the other thing, and players are absolutely notorious for this. I want to state right now, for any new DM who's had no experience with this, players love tangents. You might drop the broadest of hints on a particular party that might go completely over their heads. And as a result, they go in a totally different direction than you expected them to go. Fantasy Grounds will save you in that case. It will help you create a randomly generated encounter, randomly generated dungeon if you want it to. Although there are different resources available to that, and I'll cover those later. But don't get deflated if they don't go the direction that you presented to them. Over time, your adventure might become a full-blown campaign because as you run your adventure, every party might run through that adventure differently. And you're going to have to account for that as part of that particular adventure. My recommendation is, because you're not going to be using what's called your master template for running your adventure, make note of those changes and then incorporate that into the adventure as you go. Over time, that gives you a hugely rounded out adventure that might not still necessarily take care of everything, but you don't want something that's going to take care of everything, because then it just becomes repetitive. If the players have no tangent that they can take that you haven't already accounted for, the whole story isn't going to be boring for the players. It is now going to be boring for you. And you got to remember that as the DM, you yourself also have to enjoy this. Otherwise, you're just going to get defeated and you're going to lose interest in being a DM. You're going to lose interest in telling stories. That is something that is one of the major reasons why DMs stop being DMs, is because they get so bored with the adventures that they've run. And it may be that they just need to sit down and create a new one because they've already covered all of the tangents that could potentially occur in the campaign that they've already got running and available. So I just want to make that clear that to any new DMs, there are situations where you will eventually get to a point where you've now covered every potential tangent a party could take. Take that adventure, put it out there in the world to maybe get some money back off of it, or to share it so that others can enjoy it. But now it's time for you to create a new adventure. And because of all the experience you now have with that adventure, you'll be able to create a far more involved adventure over time. But at the same time, you don't want everything in it again, because again, you as the DM still have to enjoy it. So that's just a little opinion piece on my part, and it's really to hopefully defeat the deflation that occurs for newer DMs when they realize that players won't necessarily go the direction you expected them to take or planned for them to go. You're never going to be able to account for that. But over time, it can happen. You can get an adventure that is so covered in tangents that you've gotten completely lost in it. So those are the kinds of things that can happen. And it may be just time to take that adventure, throw it aside, and start a new one. As promised, in reference to coming up with creatures or NPCs or even objects or items or traps that you're going to want to incorporate into your adventure. In the case here, I have, for example, werewolves and liches and wights. It should be wights, not rights. Oops. So anyone who is laughing and trying to point that out to me, I did fix it. Anything along those particular lines, but being new to Dungeons & Dragons, you don't know what is available. There's a couple of ways you can go. My recommendation would be to watch movies, and a lot of them that are within the fantasy genre. Sometimes even in the sci-fi genre, but for the most part, the fantasy genre. And the reason for that is those are going to give you ideas of what creatures you could potentially run into in any given setting. Another area would be, let's say you love the Forgotten Realms world. And the reason you're starting to DM is because you have been reading through some of the books that deal with Forgotten Realms. Continue reading them. They will give you so many ideas that you can incorporate into your adventure. They will cover the situations where specific types of creatures are going to show up. For example, a swamp might have lizardmen, or it might have giant turtles, depending on. And I don't mean the super island-sized giant turtles. I mean like giant turtles that are like 3 times larger than a man, that kind of thing. Or a sewer might have slimes in it. Things like that. You're going to learn where those things come into play. At the same time, watch other YouTube or Twitch or other whatever streaming platform you prefer, where there are dungeon masters who are streaming on those particular channels or media, because they will use creatures typically in an area where you expect to see them. They might also throw them into an area where you don't expect to see them, but it makes sense. Those kinds of things. So once you've gotten that under your belt, i.e., that's your research, you're going to want to look at getting your hands on a module called the Monsters Manual. And shrink that up. And it's called the D&D Monster Manual. And again, whether it's a physical copy, whether it's a PDF, or strictly the only one that's in within Fantasy Grounds, then that information will pop up as available sources. So right now my NPC thing is empty, and it'll take a moment to load the module, and by the time that module is loaded, the NPC window will pop open and it will populate. So all of these come from the Monsters Manual. There are a few items, I do believe, that come, so there are some that come from the Dungeon Master's Guide, mostly traps for the most part. But if you want a wider selection, I would recommend getting your hands on the Monster Manual. And I'm not affiliated with Wizards of the Coast or Fantasy Ground or Smiteworks rather in any way, shape, or form. So this isn't a sponsored reference in that respect, if that makes any sense. It's just my experience as a DM. If you want to be able to have a variety of creatures there, but you don't want to splurge on a whole lot of supplements, the Monster Manual is definitely one you'll want to make use of. Now, there are others too, and I will go through and cover those at a later date. But for right now, the one that you'd want to look at would be the Monster Manual. Okay, so that'll end this particular video series, or not series, video. And what I'm going to do next is I'm now going to show you how to take Fantasy Grounds and create the framework where you're going to take this information in. So before I do that, what I highly recommend you do is copy this information. So Control-A, Control-C, open up Notepad or your favorite text editor. Ugh. And hopefully that doesn't happen to you. Oh my, okay. Let's see. Have I got Notepad++? Let's see here. There we go. Okay. So Notepad++ seems to work with it. So if you don't have that software and you're on Windows, I highly recommend you use that as a text editor. Yeah, Notepad normal needs a little bit of work. And just save that and set it aside, because this is going to get blown away. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.